The envelope was crisp, the kind of paper that crinkled with intent. It bore the emblem of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association in embossed gold, and when I slid it open on that breezy Tuesday morning, a folded letter slid out with the smug weight of a verdict. We have received reports of an offensive odor emanating from your property. Please resolve this matter within 72 hours to avoid further penalties. I read the lines 3 times, each pass tightening the knot in my stomach. Offensive odor? Penalties? I lived in a tidy, 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn and a front porch wrapped in hanging ferns. Just that morning, I trimmed the hedges and watered the rosemary bush. The scent in the air was crisp, clean even, like fresh grass and soil. There was no smell. No way. Then I saw the last line, and signed but unmistakable in tone. Officially anonymous, but the author might as well have stamped her name across the top in bold ink. Karen Hollister. Everyone in Willow Creek knew Karen. She was the chair of the HOA board and a tyrant in khaki slacks. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, she marched the sidewalks with her yappy Pomeranian, Ginger, in tow, wielding the HOA handbook like a holy relic. No trash cans after sunrise. No visible garden hoses. Lawn no higher than 3.5 inches. She measured them. Since I moved in 6 months ago, Karen had filed complaints for a dozen trifles, my porch light being too bright, my mailbox being a shade too modern, and once, for a leaf blower she thought I was using on a Sunday. She never addressed me directly. Her power was bureaucratic, silent, and wielded with infuriating precision. But this time it was personal. I didn't hesitate. I wiped the sweat from my hands and walked 2 houses down to her home, a prim white-paneled shrine to suburban conformity. The curtains twitched before I even knocked. Ginger's bark erupted behind the door, shrill and commanding. The door opened a crack, then wide enough to reveal Karen in all her passive-aggressive glory. Pastel sweater knotted at the shoulders, her smile poised and weaponized. "Oh, you," she said, her voice syrupy and thin. "I assume you're here about the letter?" "I am," I said. "I just got it this morning. An odor complaint." Karen's smile twitched wider, as if delighted to deliver more bad news. "Several neighbors have raised concerns," she replied, eyes darting behind me, likely checking to see if my garbage cans were in violation. "It's been described as musty. Moldy even. Not very welcoming." "I haven't noticed anything," I said carefully. "And no one's mentioned it to me." "Well," she said, adjusting the silk scarf at her neck, "some residents are more sensitive to such things. But the HOA has standards, and I do hope you'll take it seriously. We'd hate to escalate the matter." She stepped back, 1 foot inside her doorway. "Karen, can I ask who exactly complained?" "I'm afraid that's confidential," she said, her tone darkening. "We value our residents' privacy." Then the door closed. Ginger's barking faded as I stood on her porch, fuming. I turned to walk back and caught a whiff of something sour, not from my house, but from hers. A swampy, wet stink curled from the side yard. It wasn't strong, but it clung to the air like mold on wet paper. I paused. I had smelled it before, in passing, always faint, always dismissed. But now I followed it with intent, detouring slightly as I passed her backyard. Through the cracks in the fence, I glimpsed a crumbling wooden shed, its paint peeling, surrounded by soggy grass darkened with some kind of runoff. I knew then that whatever this game was, Karen had just taken it 1 move too far. Back inside my house, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Willow Creek HOA bylaws. The document was nearly 50 pages long, part legal code, part manifesto. Karen's gospel. If she wanted to play games, I'd play chess. And I'd come prepared. Over the next few days, I played the waiting game. Each evening, I strolled past her property, pausing just long enough to observe. I noted the times the sprinklers came on and how the smell worsened afterward. One morning, after a rainy night, I saw a greenish-brown sludge oozing down the driveway, disappearing into the storm drain. That evening, I took a sterile container from my garage, walked to the drain, and scooped a sample of the runoff. It smelled like compost left to rot in a wet basement. I labeled the jar and placed it in a cooler. The next morning, I called the county code enforcement office. I'm concerned about a possible environmental hazard, I told them. My neighbor's property is emitting a strong smell and leaking fluid into the street. Could someone take a look? They promised to send an inspector within 2 weeks. I thanked them and hung up, feeling a small flicker of justice spark to life. But I wasn't done. I knew that if I was going to challenge Karen, I'd need more than sludge and suspicion. I needed to shake the tree she perched on, the HOA itself. The monthly HOA meeting was 3 days away. I had never attended one before, but that changed now. I dusted off a collared shirt, printed out copies of the photos I'd taken, and highlighted passages in the bylaw packet. The meeting was held in the Willow Creek Community Center, a beige-walled room that smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. Folding chairs formed a semicircle, and a long table at the front seated the board members. Karen sat at the center, flanked by 2 nodding members who looked like they'd been attending these meetings since the Reagan administration. She spotted me the moment I walked in, her eyes narrowing, lips pursed in polite disdain. "Welcome," she said to the room, then added pointedly, "especially to our new attendees." When the meeting opened to homeowner concerns, I raised my hand. "Yes?" she asked, barely masking her irritation. "I'd like to report a potential violation," I said, standing, "concerning unsanitary conditions and possible environmental runoff from a property on Oak Hill Drive." Karen blinked. "That's very vague," she said. "I've submitted a formal complaint to the county," I continued, ignoring her. "I also have photo documentation and a sample of the material seeping into the storm drain." I placed the packet of photos on the table. The other board members leaned in. Karen's smile grew taut. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but the HOA board isn't an environmental authority. If the county finds something, we'll respond appropriately." "I just wanted it on record," I said, "in case anyone else experiences a similar issue." Karen didn't respond. Her silence was confirmation. Outside, as the meeting broke, one of the other board members caught up with me. "I've lived here 20 years, he said in a low voice. "Always thought something smelled funny about Karen's place." I smiled. "Maybe now we'll find out what it is." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Good luck. She's not easy to go up against." "I don't need her to be easy," I said. "Just wrong." That night, as I sat on my porch, the wind shifted. The rosemary swayed gently, its scent riding the breeze like a quiet anthem. From down the block, the familiar stench curled into the air again, faint, but undeniable. The game had begun.
The citation was the first time Karen had tasted her own medicine. But it wasn't the last. The morning after the inspector's visit, my phone buzzed with a dozen text messages from neighbors. Screenshots of Karen's furious emails flooding the HOA thread. "Insubordination will not be tolerated. All residents must remember their place in our community." The inspector was clearly misled. She was spiraling. The code violation on her own property wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a blow to her power. And power, I was starting to realize, was all Karen had. By the weekend, a new emergency HOA inspection policy had been circulated, unsigned but clearly written by her. It threatened random walkthroughs of residents' yards to ensure compliance with scent, site, and structural standards. Yes, scent. I laughed when I read it. Then I stopped laughing. Because Karen wasn't going down quietly. That same afternoon, I noticed a car idling in front of my house. A silver sedan. Sat there for 10 minutes. When I stepped outside, it sped away. The next day, a drone buzzed over my backyard just as I was refilling the bird bath. The day after that, someone left a printout of the HOA rulebook in my mailbox. Sections about pet leash lengths and olfactory disturbances, highlighted in neon yellow. Subtle wasn't her thing. But intimidation wasn't going to work on me. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat at my kitchen table, and made a list. Plan. Karen had ruled this neighborhood for too long by weaponizing the bylaws. But every dictator has a weak spot. I just had to find hers. First, documentation. I started taking pictures of her yard, her dog's constant barking, the pile of mildewed patio furniture under her deck that technically violated the visible waste clause. I set up a cheap motion-activated camera facing the walkway between our homes. Nothing illegal, just insurance. Second, allies. I started knocking on doors. Susan, my neighbor across the street, had lived in Willow Creek for 13 years. She fined me for a crack in my driveway once, she said. Told me if I didn't fix it in a week, she'd report me to the city. It was February. The ground was frozen. Took notes. Next, I visited Martin and Leslie, quiet retirees who rarely came out except to garden. Karen had written them up for having non-regulation mulch. Yes, mulch. She told us the color wasn't aesthetically consistent, Leslie said with a hollow laugh. We've been terrified of her ever since. I listened. I documented. I told them what happened with the code inspector. You mean she actually got cited? Martin's eyes lit up. About time. By the end of the week, I had 7 statements. 7 neighbors who'd been threatened, fined, or bullied. I wasn't the only one with a story. Then came the break I didn't expect. He was the treasurer of the HOA. A wiry man with nervous eyes and a collection of neckties that screamed reluctant professionalism. I ran into him at the community mailboxes. You Nathan, he asked. The one with the rosemary. That's me, I said cautiously. He glanced around, then handed me a folded piece of paper. You didn't get this from me. Before I could ask anything else, he walked off. I opened it when I got home. It was a scanned copy of Karen's original HOA board appointment letter, signed not by a full board, but by her husband, who'd since moved out and was no longer even a resident. The implication was clear. Karen hadn't been elected. She'd been placed. Legally. I stared at the document for a long time, my heart beating a little faster. This wasn't just about gardens and fines anymore. This was about legitimacy. If Karen wasn't a legally elected board chair, every violation she'd issued, every fine, every citation, was on shaky ground. I emailed a friend of mine who worked in property law. I asked hypothetical questions. I showed him the letter. This wouldn't hold up, he said bluntly. If she wasn't elected per the bylaws, any enforcement action she took could be challenged, possibly even reversed. It was a crack in the foundation. Big one. Still, I needed more than legal hypotheticals. I needed a pattern, a narrative. So I called the city code enforcement office. Yes, she's called before, the clerk told me, her voice weary. Several times. Anonymous reports. Sometimes about smells, sometimes about noise, dogs, untrimmed hedges. We document them, but rarely find anything actionable. I asked if I could request the public record logs. Sure, she said. Give me a few days. When they arrived, they spanned over 30 pages. Complaints filed from an anonymous email address with timestamps, locations, and an almost pathological attention to detail. All roads led back to Karen. The following HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread fast that something was happening. Karen sat at the front like a queen on a crumbling throne, her dog Ginger in her lap, a clipboard in her hands. Before the meeting began, I raised my hand. I have something I'd like to present, I said. She frowned. Residents may only speak during designated community comment periods. Doug, sitting beside her, cleared his throat. Actually, any resident may request to be added to the agenda with 24 hours notice. Nathan did that. He may proceed. Karen's lips thinned. I stepped forward with a small stack of papers, one for each board member. This is a copy of the letter appointing Karen as board chair, I said. It's not signed by the required quorum. In fact, it's signed by one person, her spouse, who no longer resides in Willow Creek. A stunned silence fell over the room. And this, I said, holding up a separate packet, is a record of over 35 complaints filed with the city by a single anonymous source, all from our neighborhood. All consistent with a campaign of harassment. Karen's voice shook. This is slander. You have no proof. Doug spoke up again. The HOA bylaws are clear. Board positions must be filled by vote, not appointment. If this document is accurate, your position is invalid. People started murmuring. Karen's face paled. I move to suspend the chair pending legal review, Doug said quietly. Effective immediately. Susan seconded. The motion passed. Karen stood up so fast Ginger jumped from her lap with a startled yelp. This is absurd. You're all being manipulated by someone who doesn't even know our standards. He lets his rosemary bush run wild. No, I said calmly. I let it grow. There's a difference. She stormed out. The room erupted into conversation. Neighbors talking, comparing notes, some even laughing. The spell had broken. Outside, under the warm glow of the streetlights, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Karen wasn't the kind to go down without a fight. She'd be back. And I had to be ready. Karen didn't go quietly. 2 days after the citation, a new notice was taped to my front door. Another infraction. This time it was for visible storage of tools, referencing a small spade I had left leaning against my garden bed. Petty didn't begin to cover it. She was retaliating. A few other neighbors received similar notices, all with suspicious timing. Susan across the street, who'd waved to the inspector the day he came, was cited for excessively loud wind chimes. Jordan, a young father who once hosted a backyard barbecue after 8 p.m., was slapped with a warning about extended noise. I knew what Karen was doing, punishing dissent, tightening her grip. But something had changed. The air had shifted. Whispers carried more than complaints now. They carried defiance. I got a call from Doug, the HOA's quiet treasurer. We'd never spoken before. Listen, he said after a pause. This whole thing with Karen, it's gotten out of hand. She's gone rogue. The board's supposed to vote on violations, not let her issue them unilaterally. Then why hasn't anyone stopped her? Yes, he sighed. Because no one wants to fight her. She's loud, relentless, and she knows the rules better than anyone. But rules work both ways, I said. Right. Doug paused again. You thinking what I'm thinking? I already had been. It's time for an election. HOA leadership elections were annual, but they could be expedited if a petition gathered signatures from a third of the community. It wasn't impossible, just uncommon. And with the way Karen operated, few people had dared try. Till now. I printed 50 copies of the petition and walked door to door. Some people were hesitant at first, afraid of drawing Karen's wrath. But others were eager, tired of years under her rule. The citation against her, now public record, had changed the narrative. Karen was no longer the enforcer. She was the violator. I always knew something wasn't right with her place, one man said, signing without hesitation. She fined me once for having sunflowers in my front yard, an elderly woman muttered as she scribbled her name. Said they were too unruly. Can you believe that? By the end of the week, I had 37 signatures. More than enough. I submitted the petition to the HOA board and demanded an emergency meeting. Karen tried to block it, of course. These efforts are frivolous and hostile, she said at the emergency session, her voice sharp as glass. They only serve to divide our community and erode the standards we've worked so hard to maintain. I stood calmly before the group. Standards should apply to everyone, I said, including board members. If we're going to enforce the rules, we have to follow them first. A murmur rippled through the seated residents. Doug cleared his throat. The petition meets all legal requirements. We will hold an election next month. All current board members, including the chair, may be challenged. Karen looked at me, her expression like cracked porcelain. For the first time I saw something behind the smugness. Fear. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood became a chessboard. Karen canvassed with desperate intensity, slipping flyers into mailboxes, cornering residents during walks, spouting promises of stricter lawn standards and revitalization incentives. But it rang hollow. I didn't campaign with threats. I hosted small gatherings in my backyard. I shared coffee with neighbors. I listened. I let them vent. Most of them didn't care about the bylaws. They cared about feeling harassed, controlled, and silenced. I just want to live here in peace, one neighbor told me. Not feel like I'm being watched every time I walk my dog. That became my platform. Simpler rules. Transparent decisions. Real community. Election day arrived on a warm Saturday. Residents filed into the community center, voting slips in hand. Karen stood near the sign-in table, lips taut, her outfit crisp and overly formal, like a CEO defending a crumbling company. When the votes were tallied, Doug stepped to the podium. "The new chair of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association," he announced, "is Nathan Brooks." My heart skipped. I stood slowly as a few claps turned into applause. Karen remained seated, unmoving. Ginger barked from her lap, but she didn't flinch. I walked to the front and took the microphone. I didn't gloat. I didn't boast. I simply looked out at the faces in the room. Faces that had once avoided eye contact, now looking up with hope. "Let's make this neighborhood somewhere we all want to live," I said. Karen stood. "You won't last," she said quietly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "This place will fall apart without order." I met her eyes. There's a difference between order and fear. She left without another word. Back home, I stepped onto my porch, the scent of rosemary in the air again. The breeze was clean. But I knew this wasn't over. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who lose power. Karen vanished for 3 days. No emails. No complaints. No HOA notices on anyone's porch. Ginger barked from her window. But the house remained silent. Still, I didn't trust it. Karen wasn't the type to retreat, she was reloading. And I was right. On the 4th day, the neighborhood awoke to flyers taped to every mailbox. Glossy, bold font, full of half-truths. "Your new HOA chair. Is he safe for our streets?" Beneath the headline was a blurry, clearly zoomed-in photo of me talking to Susan in her driveway, mid-laugh, as if that was damning. Underneath, quotes pulled from our HOA forums, wildly taken out of context, accusing me of wanting to abolish regulations, invite renters, and destroy home values. It was desperate. And it worked on some. "I just don't want to see the neighborhood change too much," one man murmured at a community barbecue. "I moved here for the peace." I didn't argue. I just nodded and let him talk. The more people spoke, the more the truth filtered through. Karen was betting on fear. I was betting on transparency. That week, I started holding open forums at the park. No microphones. Just chairs in a circle and a pot of coffee. People came. They asked questions. They challenged me. I welcomed it. We revised the HOA charter together, simplifying language, removing Karen's draconian amendments. Doug brought donuts. Leslie brought a lemon tart. Felt like a community again. But Karen wasn't done. Late one night I got a knock on my door. Doug stood there, pale and tight-lipped, holding a manila envelope. "She filed a lawsuit," he said, claiming unlawful removal from office and emotional distress. Course she did. The envelope was thick, 30 pages of legal jargon, claims that the board had conspired against her, that I had stalked her, and that the citation was coordinated defamation. My lawyer, the same friend who'd reviewed her appointment letter, read through it with a furrowed brow. "She's trying to scare you," he said. "There's no real legal standing here. But it will get messy." Karen didn't care about winning. She wanted to wear us down. And it worked on some. Board members started skipping meetings. Neighbors who'd once cheered now avoided eye contact. The fear was creeping back. Then came the fire. One morning, I walked outside to find smoke curling up from Karen's backyard. A section of her fence had caught flame, likely from an old electrical cord used to power a lawn light. The fire was small, already extinguished, but fire trucks were there. And so was the inspector. He remembered me. "Looks like this wiring's ancient," he said, pointing to the charred outlet. "Code violation. Probably should have been replaced a decade ago." Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed, lips thin. I didn't say a word. That afternoon, the fire marshal issued a notice. Multiple safety violations. Her home, for all its outward perfection, was rotting from the inside. The neighborhood watched, and something shifted again. Karen had built her power on image. Her lawn, her clipboard, her carefully curated sense of order. But now she was exposed, vulnerable, and people were tired of pretending. At the next board meeting, held in Doug's backyard with cookies and folding chairs, Susan stood up. "I move to formally dissolve Karen's former position," she said. "Retroactively. Based on false appointment and misconduct." No one objected. Not even Doug. The vote passed unanimously. The lawsuit was dropped a week later. Karen's house went up for sale a month after that. The sign appeared quietly overnight. No goodbye letters. No curtain calls. And one morning the moving van pulled away. She didn't look back. The neighborhood felt different. Not just because of the silence, but because people started showing up. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalks again. Martin planted sunflowers in his front yard and no one stopped him. Leslie hosted a movie night on her lawn and the whole block came. Even Ginger seemed quieter. We re-elected the board with community voting, rewrote the rules to emphasize guidance over punishment, and opened the HOA books for anyone who wanted to see them. Transparency at last. Kept my rosemary bush. Still untrimmed. Still fragrant. No one complained. Karen didn't just lose a power struggle. She reminded us all why we needed to fight for our space. To protect it not just from outsiders, but from the people who claim to act in our name while serving only themselves. In the end, we didn't defeat her with anger. We did it with light. And it was enough.